This is TV18 and you're watching CNBC TV18.
Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV18 special show. The decision by low-cost airlines to levy an additional charge on seat selection by passengers who check in online is now under the government scanner. In a statement, the Aviation Ministry has said that it has noted how some airlines are charging a few for all seats via web check-in and announced a review of this to determine if this would fall under the unbundling framework. So what exactly is this unbundling framework? Low-cost carriers levy an extra charge for items like additional baggage, food, extra legroom and seats at the front of the aircraft. This is an important revenue stream for them, and it's no secret that almost all airlines are struggling at this point in time to turn in a profit. The controversy largely kicked off when Indigo responded to a query from a passenger on Twitter. The airline's official handle announced that as per its revised policy, all seats are chargeable for web check-in. Today, in a clarification, the airline said that the pricing is only for advanced seats, and when a customer checks in at the airport, seats would be assigned for free. So the big question that we are asking today, should airlines be allowed to charge for all seats if passengers check in online? Should such a charge fall under the current unbundling framework? For that, joining in now to discuss this further are our esteemed panel of guests, Devesh Agarwal, aviation expert, Dheeraj Mathur, the ED of PwC, Mark Morton, founder and CEO of Morton Consulting, and Ajay Athwani, the founder and editor of Live from A Lounge, will also be joining in. Mr. Mathur, let me come to you first. As far as the overall pricing strategy is concerned, do you believe that charging ancillary services and creating that as a separate revenue stream, do you believe that that is a sign of things to come?
Good evening. Actually, it's not a sign of things to come. It is. This is the reality of today. And this didn't start today. The DGC allowed unbundling of services way back in 2015. And I think globally in the US, it started in 2008 when the price of crude crossed $130 a barrel. So this is nothing new. But the basic idea of unbundling is that passenger pays only for those services that she needs or wants. And not for everything else, because in a full-service carrier, you have a lot of services that are bundled up together, food, beverages, etc. And some passengers may not want them. So that's where the idea of unbundling comes from. And it is actually at the heart of the low-cost carrier operations.
But Mr. Mathur, just to interrupt you on that point, specifically, do you then agree, the government is right now trying to figure out if this does fall under unbundling or not, if charging for web check-in across the board falls under that category. Do you, to your mind, believe that that is under that category at all? Is this like charging guests for food services, etc.?
Well, if you're charging for every seat on a web check-in, then that's clearly against the existing guidelines, which allow only for preferential seating. So preferential seating would mean the exit row where you have extra legroom and so on. But if you're going to have a charge for every seat, then in effect you're increasing your ticket price without really increasing it. So it's sort of a concealed
that's an important point that you brought up, Mr. Mathur. Let me bring our other guests also into the conversation. Mark Morton is joining in as well. Mark, answer that point. Does this mean that airlines can increase prices without really increasing the base price of the air freight? Is this a disguised way of increasing prices here?
Good evening. Thanks for having me today. It's good to be back on CNBC. Well, I mean, it's at the discretion of the airline of what they want to offer to you as a consumer as value. Okay. Now, going by that logic, even preferential seating on the emergency exit row can also be questioned because it is a safety issue. You want to put somebody in the emergency exit row who's capable of supporting the flight attendants during an emergency. But we have to understand, this is how the LCC model works. Every piece of what you see that falls within a consumer preference is charged as a value add and something which is an add-on to your ticket. It could be as simple as 5 kgs of luggage, to an express check-in, to sitting in a lounge, to whatever that you need as a paying traveling consumer. So with respect to DGCA guidelines, I don't think the DGCA should have or will have or would have any CAR definition to regulate an airline for this. It pretty much is consumer courts. And what's interesting is, while every country in the world actually has a travel dispute, an air travel dispute appellate tribunal, we don't have anything of that kind in India. That's why every single one of our disputes are taken up with the consumer court or the high court, which is very unfortunate. So to answer your question, yes, I think in my view, it always helps airlines add a little more on the revenue side. And it's as simple as that. If you don't want to use that service, you don't web check in, and you get them to assign you a seat when you get in.
Sure.
The chances of you getting assigned a window
Mark, would
seat
you
or a
say
middle
that this
seat
is
much high.
necessary, charging for ancillary services, and this does fall under that? Would you say that for airlines to make a profit or to be able to see a turnaround, given the kind of issues with respect to Forex and with respect to ATF prices, do you think that this is necessary and that all airlines may end up doing this?
Look, let's do the math. 500 rupees a seat preference multiplied by, on an average, 180 seats, a typical flight segment. Even if we go at 150 seats, that's what they're making, right? So, yes, it is true that the rise in currency and oil has kind of really worsened the blow on airlines, and this in some way may soften the blow. But I don't think this is here to stay, because I think we all know that airlines understand that this is hurting their loyalty bracket, their consumer, and they will obviously opt for full service airlines if they pay that. If they really want to pay more, they'll go to somebody else. So this is just a phase. I mean, I'd like to consider when we start taking advantage of a lower fuel price, I do believe they may withdraw this sometime in January or February.
It could be interim for now. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay. Interesting point there. Mr. Devesh Agarwal, Mr. Mathur raised a very interesting point early on, talking about how are airlines using this preferred model to increase prices without really increasing prices. So my question to you is, in that case, are any of these airlines falling under the low-cost model at all?
Good evening, and thank you for having me on CNBC. It's a great pleasure. And you see, what Mr. Mathur said is absolutely correct. There is pricing pressure, and basically, if you ask me, I disagree with what the DGCA is doing. It is ultimately for the consumer to decide whether they want to fly the airline. Now, when they do, unfortunately, a lot of people have, a lot of passengers have got their mindset now that, Indigo is the lowest price regardless. If they have to start using sites like Google Flights and all to do some comparative shopping, and they might find other airlines, and let's face it, whether it is Jet Airways or even Air India, if you see, they are being forced in terms of expectations of the passengers to offer full services, but at a low-cost fare.
Correct.
That is not, fair to the airlines, and they're losing money hand over fist. We're seeing those kinds of, the red ink is flowing all over the balance sheets of all the airlines. But the thing, to passengers who are getting disturbed by this 100 rupee fee, I say one is added mentally into.
Mr. Agarwal, it actually starts at 100 rupees and it goes up to 800 rupees. So, passengers across the board have raised points that it's no longer about the preferred seat. Even a middle seat in the middle row is being charged. So, just taking from that point, and let me bring Ajay into the conversation. Ajay, come in on the point that Devesh was making over here, that at the end of the day, this is an airline figuring out how they want to create alternate sources of revenues. So my first question to you, do you believe that this is going to be an interim period? And is this an increase in fare indirectly? Is this a change in the low-cost model altogether?
Hi, Shireen. Thank you for having me over. And to answer your first question, all the low-cost airlines around the world charge for seating. Okay, in India, unfortunately, there's not too much of a difference between low-cost carriers and full-service carriers. And the preferred term I use for Indigo or SpiceJet is no-frills carriers, because they're operating from the same airports, the kind of terminal charges, everything that they're paying is all the same. So it's basically clever marketing where Indigo and SpiceJet call themselves low-cost carriers.
Yeah.
Like my previous commenter was stating that, it's now embedded in the psychology of Indians that Indigo is a low-cost carrier, so they kind of don't comparison shop and just go with them.
Right.
But the point now is that all these guys are only a couple of hundred rupees lower than, let's say, a Jet Airways or Vistara on most routes. So that's the only thing, and the only differentiating factor.
The point that you made, that there are a couple of, my team has actually done the math. So if you look at Indigo, for instance, and I'm talking about the same day on comparable routes from Delhi to Mumbai, and Indigo flights cost about 7,363. Jet Airways with meals included is 8,702. Vistara is just 300 more than the Indigo airline, 7,612. And let's not compare only Indigo. The other low cost, like Go Air, for instance, is also 7,300 something. And SpiceJet is in fact 7,700. So, those amounts and those figures are pretty much saying it all. Do you then agree that low cost and full services cannot be made into a distinction then? Dheeraj, that question to you first.
Yeah, so the first point I want to make is that the dispute arises when every seat is priced. When you do a web check-in. That's the first point that I want to reiterate.
Correct.
The DGCA has allowed food, etc. The whole list of additional facilities that the DGCA has said are permitted as add-ons, including preferential seat. So if it's preferential, it's fine, but if it's 100%, then it's not as per the existing guidelines. That was the question, and that's what I want to clarify.
Sure.
Now, the second point is that if you, as I said, this is not anything that is new. This has been around for a long time. So if you, and you can't really turn the clock back on something like this, because airlines are only going to face increasing cost pressures as we move on. I mean, crude may not be 130 barrel, but there are a lot of other things that are happening within the industry that are going to put cost pressure. So there will always be this issue, and airlines will look at how they can, claw back revenue without really raising the ticket price.
Okay, fair enough. Very quick question to Devesh before I take a break. Devesh, a point that Mark was making earlier was that this is something that has been used overseas as well. So globally, this is a usual practice. Do you believe that this is India perhaps moving towards what has been practiced overseas? Is this not very unusual to finally come to India?
No, in fact, I was rather surprised why it has not yet come to India. But having said that, what I would like to observe is worldwide, low-cost carriers rely on automation and passengers helping themselves. In fact, one low-cost carrier CEO one day laughingly joked. He said passengers are self-loading cargo. The idea is that the airlines are trying to push as much of the effort of running the logistics of their travel onto the passengers itself, so that it allows the airline to run a much leaner operation in terms of their staff. It is that way a little perplexing that why Indigo would have done this. Because if anything, it discourages people from online check-in, and then you have more queues at the airport. But then, I started remembering an adage, any publicity is good. So for all I know, Indigo is doing this, just to get some traction on its name.
A very interesting point that we're going to take this point forward and bring everyone into this issue. Let's take a very short break on that note, though the discussion will continue on the other side. Stay right there and keep it with CNBC TV 18. Welcome back to the CNBC TV18 special discussion. To continue this forward, still with us are Devesh Agarwal, aviation expert, Mark Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Consulting, Ajay Atwane, founder and editor of Live from A Lounge, and Dheeraj Madhur, the ED of PwC. I'll go across to Mark then. Mark, Devesh was, I think, making a point that this is something that was pending, that it's surprising that India actually adopted this now. Whereas globally, we are seeing not just web check-in, we're also seeing cabin baggage, we're seeing several ancillary services being charged, and that's become what is the common norm in European and American airlines. Do you believe that this is something that was pending over here and this is something that could take root? And help us understand the global average of ancillary services and how critical they are to global airlines.
So, you know, Kritika, if you look at it back when LCC started and Deccan got up and running in 2003 and 4, you know, consumers were aghast when they were not allowed to take that extra 10 kgs. I mean, we saw travelers fly with 25, 30 kgs and then to come down to 15. But it took the Indian consumer to get more and more discerning and understand his needs from air travel, you know. And so it has been a transition over the years. If you look at how Lion Air prices its model, they charge you for on board. They just give you 6 kgs of luggage. You have to pay for your 15 kgs of extra luggage that you need, which is in the cargo hold.
No,
you know?
but not only extra, Mark, even the normal check-in baggage in some cases. I just about 10 days ago paid about, I think, 50 euros for a 17 kg bag, which is a check-in bag.
You fly Thai Air Asia, you fly Wizz Air, EasyJet, Ryanair, Lion Air, you fly, you know, Tiger. Everyone charges you for checked-in luggage. And you know, and what's interesting is I like the way this, I like the way the discourse is moving here, because clarity on the LCC model is coming clear. Our airlines, by definition, can never be LCCs because LCCs only fly during off-peak hours when the costs of air navigation is lower, landing parking is less, and it obviously goes to, you know, as Ajay said, to LCC airports, which we don't have in the country. So, you know, the moment, but here we have LCCs flying during peak hours, you know, from 5 a.m. to 9, 10 in the morning and 4 to 11 in the night. So, you know, these are not by definition, they're probably what you call a value. At best, I define them as a value plus airline because all they're doing is they're trying to reside the ticket price on a very low, you know, indirect operating cost and a financial model, which is amortized.
So this basically brings us to the same point, Mark, that there aren't actually any low-cost airlines in that case. Ajay, very quickly comment on this point.
There are no low-cost airlines. Very well said. We don't have them.
Okay, so that is perhaps now a reality, that there is no differentiation between the full-service and low-cost airlines. Then, Ajay, do you believe that other services are likely to be included as well? Do you believe that this is something that may be considered? Or do you also think, like one of our panelists was saying, that this could be just an interim move to wither the crisis? Are we headed towards the global norm, or is this temporary?
I think we already started heading towards the global norm in 2013 when the first TGCA CAR came out on this issue. Unbundling was announced. I remember at that point of time, Indigo was trying to sell up to 72% of their seats on any plane as available for pre-assignment. Then they got pushed back, and then they went back on that to a lower limit. But I think this is not Indigo pushing the envelope. This is going to be the reality going forward, you know. And the Indian customer now needs to start differentiating and needs to start adding up the cost of all these services when they make their decision, you know.
But you know, Ajay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but doesn't this go against the whole point that we've been trying to make for the last 6 years, that air travel is now affordable? Isn't this slowly going to reduce that point altogether? Aren't we now coming in line with air travel being as expensive as it used to be about 5 to 6 years ago, when there was the kind of competition that we are seeing right now?
Yeah. So I beg to differ with you on that. Air travel, the contract of carriage from an airline's perspective is you bought a ticket on a certain flight to get from A to B, they will get you there. And they're saying everything else, the food,
is chargeable.
You know, everything else is chargeable. So they will, let's say you book XYZ 123 flight number from Mumbai to Delhi, the airline will accommodate you on that flight. and it could be on a middle seat in the last row, and it could be just with 6 kgs of cabin baggage, but they will get you there. Okay, so that's the base price you're paying for.
Okay.
Everything else they can charge for as per that DGCA circular that is effective right now. And it's now the airlines' wish if they want to charge 150 rupees for samosas, or they want to give them free, or they want to charge you 500 rupees for the same samosas. So there's no regulation around all these things.
Okay.
I was going through the circular today, and
Yeah.
preferential seating is not defined in the DGCA circular.
Exactly.
So what Indigo has done right now is to expand the ambit of preferential seating. They're saying anything that is not assigned at the airport is preferential seating, because you get to pick a seat on your own without us having being involved in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr.
So
Mathur,
this is only going to go forward.
okay, interesting point. So this, now the discussion and conversation seems to suggest that this could be here to stay. So, Mr. Mathur, you don't think that this is going to be a permanent thing. This could be temporary, an airline figuring out alternate sources of revenue. To your mind, what is the global average for ancillary revenues across the board?
You know, a few years back, it was about 10 to 12% for our low-cost carriers, you know, and that bracket of carriers. This has only been increasing as more and more of the services. Now, practically, the entire airfare has been unbundled. So the growth of ancillary services has been fairly, I don't have the latest numbers on this, but certainly for a couple of years back, it was about between 10 to 12%. But
even
increasing.
globally? Is that the global figure as well? Because if you're headed towards a global...
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Even globally, in fact, there was an explosion globally, I think between about around 2011 and 12 and 2014, 15, the increase was almost about 120%.
Right.
So that's how major the increase was. So that, of course, is will happen. Now, which services get unbundled and how they're delivered, that's another thing. There are 2 points here. The one is which services get unbundled. And secondly, that there must be transparency so that you know upfront that this is what's going to happen. Now, coming back to the first point, which is which services will get unbundled. You see, a lot of these things started becoming possible. In fact, LCCs became a viable option, largely because of technology, the internet.
Okay.
Now, and as someone pointed out, that the trend is to actually, you know, to reduce the manpower cost at the airport as far as possible.
Yeah, and they are headed towards automation to cut costs. Right. You know, Mr. Devesh Agarwal, very quickly, we're very tight on time. So the last question to you, sir, there seems to be a lot of grey areas over here. So, you know, the point that Mr. Mathur was making was very apt, that you don't really know what services, and the definition isn't very clear. So the question remains that what services fall under the unbundled area and the services broad line. What do you think the government can do over here? Is there a case of government intervention? Is there some kind of a regulation that government can do? And would it be right at all for the government to intervene?
See, the government, in my opinion, should not intervene in this case. It can intervene because, let's face it, the government controls the regulator, and all that it has
because
to turn
there is a lot of consumer angst against this, and that is why the aviation industry has taken a step.
I would advise the consumers exactly what Ajay was also saying, that, you know, it's an old saying, right? If you don't like what you get what you like. Consumers should start doing a little bit of, you know, comparison shopping. There are a lot of tools, like simple things like Google Flights, you know, which shows you all the fares and things like that. So it's not difficult for consumers to do shopping, and when they add up these ancillary fares, this thing, while we are talking of ancillary fares, and even full-service carriers in the United States, let's take Delta, United, American, how many billions of dollars they are reporting in ancillary revenue.
Yeah, that's the point.
Now, I in fact see why is it that Indian carriers are not offering something like, say, what Spirit Airlines offers in the United States. The Spirit Airlines, they have this concept of what they call a bare fare.
Sure.
That means we will carry you. You want to carry a hand baggage on board, pay me $50. You know, so And they operate from, full-service airports,
Sure,
the major airports. So that model also suits India, and I think if you really look at it...
So there are a lot of alternate models that are being looked at. There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of areas and grey areas that now have to be better defined. We are completely out of time, though, gentlemen. Mr. Devesh Agarwal, Mark Martin, Ajay, Dheeraj Mathur, thank you so much for joining us on this very special discussion. We will be raising these questions in the days to come to help our viewers and consumers better understand what to prepare for. Thank you for watching.